Imagine you are sitting in a restaurant with friends. The server asks a simple question about your order, and suddenly you realize you do not know the right English word to explain what you want. What happens when one small vocabulary mistake turns a normal dinner into a moment you will never forget? Hi everyone, I am Sarah, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to share a very real story about a restaurant mistake I made. And along the way, we will explore some useful English expressions you can use when you eat out. A few years ago, I was traveling in another country for work. After a long day of meetings, I decided to go out for dinner. The restaurant looked warm and welcoming, and many people were already eating and talking. After I sat down, the server came over with a menu and a friendly smile. I looked at the list of dishes, but some of the words were new to me. One line on the menu caught my attention. It said the dish came with a special sauce and a garnish. Let's look at that word for a moment. Garnish means a small amount of food added on top of a dish to decorate it or add flavor. For example, the chef added parsley as a garnish. At the time, I thought garnish meant something completely different. I believed it meant a side dish, something large that came next to the main meal. So, when the server returned to take my order, I confidently asked for extra garnish. Confidence can sometimes lead you into trouble, and you will see why in a moment. The server looked a little confused, but she wrote something down anyway. A few minutes later, another worker brought me a small bowl of chopped herbs. I stared at the bowl for a moment, feeling totally puzzled. Before we continue, puzzled means confused because something does not make sense. For example, she looked puzzled by the strange message. At first, I thought the bowl was just the beginning of my meal. I waited for the main dish to arrive, but nothing happened. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, I decided to ask the server what was going on. During the conversation, I tried to explain that I was still waiting for my main course. Here is a useful phrase. Main course means the biggest or most important dish of a meal. For example, chicken was the main course. The server looked at the table and said very politely, "But you already asked for garnish." Suddenly, I understood the problem. Instead of ordering a full dish, I had basically ordered decoration for food. That moment was deeply embarrassing. Just a quick note, embarrassing means making you feel shy or uncomfortable in front of others. For example, forgetting my speech was embarrassing. My face felt warm, and I tried to laugh about the situation. In English, we often say we want to laugh something off. Laugh something off means to treat a mistake like a joke so it feels less serious. For example, he laughed off the small accident. However, the story does not end there, because my mistake became even more awkward. While I was trying to explain the misunderstanding, another problem appeared. I wanted to say that I misunderstood the menu. Instead, I told the server that the menu confused me and that I was very sensitive to herbs. That was not what I meant to say at all. Let's quickly explain that word. Sensitive means reacting strongly to something like food, light, or sound. For example, he is sensitive to spicy food. The server immediately looked concerned and asked if I had an allergy. Now the situation was becoming complicated. I quickly tried to correct myself and said that I was not allergic. I had simply made a mistake. You might hear this expression a lot. Make a mistake means to do something wrong by accident. For example, I made a mistake in my homework. At that point, the server kindly offered to bring me the actual meal I wanted. Still, I could feel my confidence slowly disappearing. Have you ever had a moment where you wish you could disappear from the room? Moments like that remind us how powerful vocabulary can be. While I waited for my real dinner, I started thinking about how small language misunderstandings happen all the time. Restaurants are actually full of useful English expressions. For example, when you look carefully at the menu before ordering, we often say you are looking something over. Look something over is a common phrasal verb, and it means to check something carefully. For example, she looked over the report. That evening, I realized that I had not really looked the menu over. I had only scanned it quickly because I was hungry. Eventually, the correct dish arrived. The meal smelled wonderful, and the presentation looked beautiful. Before I started eating, I noticed a tiny green leaf placed neatly on top of the food. Of course, it was the garnish. Here is another helpful word. Presentation means the way food looks when it is served. For example, the cake had a nice presentation. At that moment, I started laughing again. Now the whole experience felt like a funny story instead of a disaster. Sometimes we say something becomes a learning moment. Learning moment means a situation where a mistake helps you understand something better. For example, the error became a learning moment, and honestly, that restaurant experience became one of my favorite language memories. Soon after, I began to notice how many special expressions people use when they talk about food. For instance, people often say a dish is rich in flavor. Let's look at that phrase. Rich in flavor means the taste is strong and satisfying. For example, the soup is rich in flavor. Another expression you will hear in restaurants is try something out. Try something out means to test or experience something new. For example, I want to try out a new restaurant. That night, I certainly tried something out, although not in the way I planned. Little by little, I also learned an important idiom. When a situation becomes uncomfortable, people sometimes say they are in a tight spot. In a tight spot means being in a difficult or awkward situation. For example, he was in a tight spot during the interview. Sitting there with my bowl of herbs, I was definitely in a tight spot. Still, the staff were kind, and that helped me relax. Good service can completely change how a situation feels. Let's quickly explain that word. Service means the way staff help and treat customers in a restaurant or hotel. For example, the service was excellent. After finishing my meal, I thanked the server and explained the misunderstanding again. This time, we both laughed. That experience also taught me something about language learning. When you study English, it is easy to focus only on grammar. However, real communication often depends on small vocabulary details. For example, knowing the difference between a side dish, a topping, and a garnish can change the whole meaning of your order. Here is a useful phrase. Side dish means a small dish served next to the main meal. For example, rice is a side dish. Without the right words, even simple situations can become confusing. But mistakes are also part of the learning process. In fact, many language teachers say that mistakes help your brain remember words more strongly. There is also a nice expression for learning through experience. Learn the hard way means learning something after making a mistake. For example, he learned the hard way to save money. That evening in the restaurant, I definitely learned the hard way what garnish really means. Now, whenever I sit in a restaurant and read a menu in English, I take my time. I look over the dishes carefully, and I pay attention to the details. Funny enough, that small mistake gave me confidence later. After surviving an awkward moment like that, asking questions about food feels easy. And honestly, many native speakers make similar mistakes when they travel or try new cuisine. Language is full of these tiny traps, but each one can become a story you tell later. So the next time you eat at a restaurant in English, remember my bowl of herbs. A simple word can change your entire dinner. And sometimes, those small misunderstandings become the moments we remember the most. Before we finish, here is the real lesson from my embarrassing restaurant mistake. Vocabulary is not just about memorizing words. It is about understanding how people actually use them in everyday life. If you enjoy learning English through real situations like this one, consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. Here, we explore fascinating topics and everyday conversations that help you improve your listening, pronunciation, and vocabulary, step by step. And who knows, the next time someone asks about your most embarrassing restaurant moment, you will have the perfect words to tell the story.